They seated me at the table closest to the kitchen, the one that wobbled unless you wedged a folded cocktail napkin under the left rear leg. I know because I was the one who found the napkin. I was the one who always noticed the things nobody else bothered to fix. And somehow that still wasn't the part that broke me. The part that broke me came later, when a woman I hadn't seen in 4 years walked into that banquet hall, scanned the room, and found me immediately. Not my parents. Not my brother. Me. And when she crossed the entire length of that room to reach my corner table, I watched my mother's face go very, very still. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me go back to where it started. Back to the day my brother called to tell me Dad was turning 70. It was a Tuesday in early October. I was sitting in my truck outside a job site in western Pennsylvania, eating a gas station sandwich and reviewing load calculations on my laptop. Civil engineering is not a glamorous profession. Nobody makes movies about women who calculate soil compression ratios and argue with contractors about rebar spacing. But I loved it. I had loved it since I was 9 years old and watched a crew build a pedestrian bridge over the creek behind our neighborhood, marveling at how something that heavy could hang so lightly over moving water. My brother, I'll call him Daniel because that's his name, and he's earned being named, called at 12:18 p.m. I remember because I had exactly 12 minutes left on my lunch break. Dad's 70th is December 14th, he said, skipping hello. Mom's doing a dinner. 90 guests, Callaway Banquet Hall. You should come. Should. Not we want you here. Not we'd love to see you. Should. Of course, I said. I'll be there. Don't make a big deal about travel or whatever. Mom's already stressed. I hadn't said a word about travel or whatever. Mom's already stressed. I hadn't said a word about travel. I sat with the phone in my lap for a moment after he hung up. Outside, a foreman was waving at me from across the gravel lot. I waved back. I finished my sandwich. I drove back to the site and spent the afternoon checking drainage calculations, and I did not let myself think about the way my brother said should. I had a lot of practice not thinking about things. My family is not cruel. That's important to understand, because cruelty would have been easier to name, easier to walk away from. My parents are good people by most measures. They volunteer at their church, they show up when neighbors need help, they remember birthdays and send cards. My father built his own contracting business from nothing, and he is proud of that, rightly so. My mother ran the household and raised 2 children and kept everything together through lean years and hard winters, and she is proud of that too, rightly so. But somewhere in their understanding of the world, certain things counted and certain things didn't, and the things that counted were visible. Tangible. The kind you could point to at a dinner party. Daniel counted. Daniel had always counted. He was 11 when I was born, which meant by the time I was old enough to understand family dynamics, he was already the established center of gravity. He played baseball through high school, gotten a business degree, married a woman named Patrice who made her own candles, and volunteered at a literacy program, and taken over the administrative side of Dad's contracting company. He was present. He was local. He was the son who never left. I left. I left at 18 for Penn State, then for a master's program in structural engineering at Georgia Tech, then for a firm in Pittsburgh that specialized in infrastructure projects. Bridges, mostly. Highway overpasses, pedestrian crossings. One small cable stay bridge over a tributary river in western Maryland that I am quietly more proud of than anything else I've ever done. I came home for Christmas every year. I called on birthdays. I sent my parents a card on their anniversary without fail. But I was not local. I was not present in the daily fabric of their lives, and in my family, absence, even principled, career-driven absence, accrued like a debt. By the time I was 31, I had learned to manage my expectations before every visit home. I ran through it in my head on the drive from Pittsburgh like a structural checklist. Don't expect to be asked about work. Don't expect the conversation to pause when you're talking. Don't expect Dad to remember the name of the project you mentioned last Christmas. Just show up. Be pleasant. Leave intact. For a long time that worked. The night before my father's 70th birthday dinner, I drove into town and checked into a Holiday Inn 2 miles from my parents' house. I had not been offered the guest room. The guest room was being used to store the extra folding chairs for the party. I had a glass of wine in the hotel bar, called my friend Gwen in Atlanta, and told her I was fine. "You're not fine," she said. "I'm fine," I said. "Text me if you need an exit strategy." "I will not need an exit strategy." She sent me a thumbs up and I could feel the skepticism through the screen. The banquet hall my mother had chosen was a nice enough place. Neutral carpet, round tables with ivory linens, the kind of venue that had hosted 10,000 events and retained the vague scent of all of them. She had gone with navy and gold as her color scheme because those were my father's college colors, which I thought was a genuinely lovely touch. Whoever said my mother lacked sentimentality was wrong. She had enormous sentimentality. She just directed it carefully. I arrived 40 minutes early to help set up. "Oh, you don't need to do that," my mother said when she saw me lifting a centerpiece. She had the expression she always wore when I appeared at family events. Politely startled, like I was a package she'd forgotten she'd ordered. "The hall staff is handling it." "I don't mind," I said. "It's fine, sweetheart. Go find your table." I found my table. Table 11. 11 of 12. In the far left corner of the room, between the kitchen service door and the emergency exit. My name was on a small card in a plastic holder, the kind with a little base that you squeeze to open. The other names at my table, 2 of Daniel's college friends I'd met once, their wives, a neighbor's adult son who I gathered had been included out of politeness, and an empty seat with no card where I assumed someone had already backed out. I stood there holding my coat, looking at that table, and I did the math. 90 guests, 12 tables. The head table held my parents, Daniel and Patrice, my mother's sister and her husband, and my father's oldest friend. 8 seats. Every other table was arranged by visible social proximity to my father. Business partners, close friends, church community, extended family. And then, at the end of the room, near the kitchen door that swung open every 4 minutes releasing the smell of reheated chicken marsala, me. I had designed load-bearing structures that would outlast everyone in that room. I had stayed up until 2 in the morning running finite element analyses to make sure a bridge would hold safely through a 100-year storm. I had sat across from county commissioners and federal transportation officials and argued for design choices I believed in and won. And my father's 70th birthday dinner had placed me, his only daughter, 1 table away from the kitchen. I set my coat on my chair and went to get a glass of water. The guests arrived over the next hour in clusters, warm and loud, filling the room with that particular energy of a large family celebration. My father held court near the entrance, shaking hands, accepting hugs, laughing at jokes I couldn't hear from where I was standing. My mother circulated with the practiced ease of a woman who had hosted her entire adult life. Daniel stood near Dad as he always did, a quiet auxiliary son in the same orbit. I spoke with 2 of the neighbors. I complimented the centerpieces, which were actually beautiful. Small navy lanterns surrounded by white roses and sprigs of something eucalyptus adjacent. I ate a dinner roll. I smiled at people who passed my table with the vague look of not quite recognizing me. At one point, my father's business partner, a heavy-set man named Carl who had known my family for 20 years, stopped near my table and squinted at me. "You're Tom's daughter?" "I am," I said. "I'm Nora." Right. The one who moved away." He said it the way people say the one who moved away, like it explained something essential. "What do you do out there?" "Civil engineering," I said. "Structural. Mostly bridges." "Huh." He nodded like I'd said I collected stamps. "That's something." He moved on. The dinner plates arrived. The chicken marsala was reheated as I had suspected, but it wasn't bad. I made conversation with Daniel's college friend, who turned out to be a perfectly pleasant person who worked in insurance and had opinions about youth soccer leagues. I listened. I nodded. I was present. I was just present at table 11. And then the side door near the entrance opened. letting in a gust of October air, and a woman walked in. She was maybe 60, slim and sharp-looking, with close-cropped silver hair, and the posture of someone who had spent years being the most important person in any room she entered. She wore a dark green blazer and moved with the contained urgency of someone running slightly behind schedule. Behind her was a younger man who appeared to be an assistant, hovering at a respectful half-step. I recognized her before I consciously knew who she was. The brain does that sometimes, registers a face before the name surfaces. Dr. Margaret Osei. I had met her 3 years ago when I was a junior lead on a federal infrastructure project in Allegheny County. She had been the Deputy Secretary of Transportation for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania at the time. We had worked together for 5 months on a bridge replacement project over Route 30, a project that had gone 17% over initial timeline because of a subcontractor failure that was not my fault, and a materials delay that also was not my fault, and Dr. Osei had shown up to a site meeting at 7 in the morning in mud boots and a hard hat and worked through every problem systematically until we had a path forward. I had not agreed with all of her decisions. I had told her so. She had appreciated that, or at least she had said she did. She had left a deputy secretary position 8 months ago. I'd seen the announcement. She'd been appointed to a federal role, something with the Department of Transportation in Washington. I had not followed the details because I was busy recalculating a retaining wall. She was scanning the room. My first thought was that she must be here for a different event. The hall had multiple rooms. My second thought arrived when her eyes found me across the room and she changed direction. She walked the entire length of the banquet hall, past the head table where my parents sat, past tables 2 through 10, past the swinging kitchen door, all the way to table 11. People turned to watch. Of course they turned to watch. A silver-haired woman moving with that kind of purpose draws eyes. "Nora," she said, reaching my table. "I thought that was you." I stood. Old professional reflex. "Dr. Osei, I didn't know you'd be here. Tom Carter is my husband's college roommate." She said it simply, like this was information I should have had. "We've been trying to make it to something for years. Managed it finally." She glanced at the table, at the kitchen door swinging 4 feet to our left. Something crossed her face. A calculation. "You're sitting here." "I am," I said. Her eyes moved to my place card, then to the distance between my table and the head table, then back to my face. "Walk with me," she said. "Dr. Osei, it's Margaret. I keep telling you that." She looked at the empty chair beside mine, back at me. "Walk with me for a moment. I want to say hello to your parents." I don't know exactly what I expected to happen, but I followed her. She moved through the room the way I'd seen her move through job sites, without hesitation, without performing confidence, just operating at her own frequency. Conversations dimmed as she passed, not because anyone necessarily knew who she was, but because she carried the particular gravity of someone who made decisions that mattered and had been doing it long enough that it showed in her bones. My mother saw her first and brightened with the professional warmth she reserved for guests she wanted to impress. My father looked up from his conversation and extended his hand. "Margaret, wonderful of you to come. Tom, happy birthday." She shook his hand warmly, then turned to my mother. "Beverly, the room is beautiful." She paused, deliberately. "I was just finding Nora. I didn't realize she was your daughter until I saw the place card." My mother's smile maintained itself through sheer muscle memory. "We didn't know you two knew each other," my father said, looking at me. "Nora led the engineering team on the Route 30 bridge replacement in Allegheny County 3 years ago," Dr. Osei said. "You've probably driven over that bridge without knowing it. It's one of the cleaner rehabilitation projects I've seen in 20 years in transportation." She said it without ceremony, without theatrics, the way she said everything, like facts. My father blinked. "We worked well together," I said, because I didn't know what else to do with my hands. "We did," Dr. Osei agreed. "Which is why I want to ask you about something later, if you have a moment tonight." She looked at me with the focused expression I remembered from 7 a.m. site meetings. I've been asked to recommend a structural lead for a review panel on a federal bridge safety initiative. I immediately thought of you. We can talk details later. I could not have spoken right then if someone had held a microphone to my face. My father was looking at me, not past me, not through me. At me, the way you look at something you're trying to understand. Dr. Osei turned back to him pleasantly. 70 is worth celebrating, Tom. Congratulations. Then, to my mother. Beverly, I noticed the centerpieces. The lanterns are beautiful. She touched my elbow lightly. I'll find you after the speeches. She walked toward the bar where her husband was apparently waiting and left a silence behind her that was a completely different shape than the silence I had arrived in. My mother looked at me. My father looked at me. I looked at the centerpiece because the centerpiece was not going to ask anything of me. You worked on a bridge? My father said. Several, I said. The Route 31 was the biggest in that contract. I paused. I told you about it at Christmas 2 years ago. He didn't say anything for a moment. I didn't know she'd be here, I said. I didn't plan this. I know, he said, and something in his voice was different, not transformed, not cinematic, just different, quieter. Go enjoy your dinner, Nora. I went back to table 11. I sat down. Daniel's college friend was telling a story about his son's soccer tournament, and I smiled and nodded in the right places, and my mind was somewhere entirely else. The speeches started at 8. Daniel gave one, warm, funny, clearly practiced. My mother's sister gave one that made everyone cry, including me, because it was genuinely moving and grief. For lost time has a way of arriving in unexpected containers. My father's oldest friend gave one that ran 4 minutes over and included a golf anecdote, as speeches by old friends at milestone birthdays legally must. And then my father stood up. He hadn't been on the program. I could tell by the way my mother's eyebrows moved, not surprised exactly, but recalibrating. He was not a natural public speaker. He never had been. He was a man of handshakes and job sites and conversations over coffee, not microphones. He held the mic like it had personally offended him. I'm not good at this, he said, which got a warm laugh. I had something prepared, he continued, but I'm not going to say it. He looked down at the note card in his other hand and then set it face down on the table. I want to say something else. The room was quiet in the particular way rooms get when they sense something unscripted. I have a daughter, he said. Most of you know that. Some of you might have met her tonight. He paused. A lot of you probably didn't, because I put her at table 11, and I am going to have to sit with that. I went absolutely still. She builds bridges. His voice was careful, like he was picking his way across something. Real ones. I don't mean that, I mean she literally builds bridges. She's an engineer. And I didn't. He stopped. I didn't ask her enough about that. Over the years, I didn't ask, and she stopped telling me, and I think we both understood why, even if neither of us said it. At the head table, Daniel was very still too. Margaret O.C. came over and talked about my daughter's work like it was. He shook his head. Like it was the most obvious thing in the world that she should be proud of her. And I thought, that should have been me saying that. That should have been me for a long time. My eyes were burning. I was staring at the centerpiece. Nora. He said my name out loud to the room. I'm proud of you. I should have said it more. I'm saying it now. The applause was soft at first and then warmer. Not the explosive kind. Not the kind from a speech that lands perfectly. But the kind that comes from something real touching, something real. I did not stand up. I couldn't. I pressed my hands flat on the tablecloth and breathed. After a moment, the room shifted back into itself. Conversations resumed. The band started a low, easy song from the corner. Servers appeared with dessert plates. Dr. Osei appeared at my table without fanfare, pulled out the empty chair beside me, and sat down. You okay? she asked. I don't know yet, I said. She nodded like that was the correct answer. For what it's worth, I didn't intend to cause a scene. I know. I just said true things. I know, I said again. That's kind of the problem with true things. She smiled at that, dry and brief. The panel recommendation is real for what it's worth, not a kindness. You're actually the right person. I know, I said, and this time I meant it differently. She stayed for a few minutes, mostly talking about the federal initiative, real details, real timelines, the kind of conversation I can metabolize because it has a structure. Then she excused herself to find her husband, and I was alone again. But alone at table 11 felt different than it had 2 hours ago. I couldn't explain exactly why. The table was the same table. The kitchen door was still swinging. The chicken marsala smell had not improved. My father came to me before the evening ended. He walked across the room with the gait of a man who had made a decision and was carrying it carefully like something fragile. He pulled out the chair Dr. Osei had vacated and lowered himself into it. For a moment we just sat there. I didn't know how to follow what you were doing, he said eventually. The engineering, it's not a world I understand. I know, I said. That's not an excuse. No, I agreed. It's not. He exhaled. When I was building the business, the thing I was most afraid of was someone showing up and understanding my work better than I did, knowing that I didn't know enough. He looked at his hands. I think I did the same thing to you, in reverse. I made your world small so I didn't have to feel like I was standing outside it. I had never heard my father say anything like that in my entire life. I'm not asking you to undo 31 years tonight, I said carefully. No, he said, I wouldn't ask that. But I would like you to ask me about my work sometime. Actually ask. Not, I stopped. Started again. Not just listen to be polite. Ask because you want to know. He met my eyes. Tell me about the bridge, the one Margaret mentioned. So I told him, right there, at table 11, with the kitchen door swinging and the band playing something with too much saxophone. I told my father about the Route 30 bridge replacement project, about the subcontractor failure and the materials delay and the 7 a.m. meetings in the rain, about the finite element models and the load distribution problem and the solution I'd found at midnight that turned out to work, about driving over the finished bridge 6 months after completion and feeling the road hold steady beneath 4 lanes of traffic, and knowing I had done that. He listened. Not perfectly. Twice his eyes drifted briefly, but he kept coming back. He asked a question that was not quite the right question but was a real question. I answered it. When we stood to leave, he put his hand briefly on my shoulder. Come for dinner, he said. Next month. Not a holiday. Just dinner. Okay, I said. I drove back to the Holiday Inn at 11:15. I called Gwen and told her what happened. I told you you weren't fine, she said. I wasn't, I agreed. Are you now? I thought about it. The hotel parking lot was quiet. October stars over western Pennsylvania are colder than stars anywhere else, I have always thought. Sharp and far away and indifferent. I'm getting there, I said. The months after that moved at the pace of real change, which is to say, slowly, imperfectly, with backsliding and awkward phone calls and at least one dinner in February where my father and I ran out of conversation for 20 uncomfortable minutes and sat eating pot roast in silence. But we kept trying. That was new. That was the thing that hadn't existed before. My mother's adjustment was slower. She didn't acknowledge the table 11 situation directly, ever. That's not her way. But the Christmas after, she introduced me to one of her friends as my daughter Nora. She's a structural engineer. She designs bridges. Not she used to do something with engineering. Not she's got some job up in Pittsburgh. My daughter Nora, she designs bridges, small things. But structures are built of small things, connected correctly. Daniel apologized in the spring on a Tuesday, over the phone, in the middle of a conversation about something else entirely. He just said, I shouldn't have put you at table 11. I said, "No, you shouldn't have." He said, "I know." And then we talked about something else. We were not suddenly close. We had 31 years of parallel lives between us, and that doesn't dissolve over one phone call. But we were honest, and honesty is a better foundation than pretending. Dr. Osei and I worked together on the federal panel for 14 months. She was difficult and precise and occasionally infuriating, and one of the best professional relationships I've ever had. At the end of the project, at a RAP meeting in Washington, she told the assembled group that the structural framework of our final report was mine. She said it plainly, the way she said everything, like facts. I thought about my father hearing that and the expression that would have been on his face. I thought it would have been pride, finally shaped correctly, finally pointed in the right direction. The Route 30 bridge is still there. It will be there for decades, if I did my job right, which I did. People drive over it every day without thinking about it, which is the point, which is what I always wanted. Infrastructure should be invisible when it works. You only notice a bridge when something goes wrong. My family noticed me when something shifted. Maybe that's the same principle, or maybe it's the opposite. I'm still working out the engineering of it, but here's what I know. Being unseen for a long time does not mean you are unseeable. It does not mean the work you did wasn't real, or the bridges weren't sound, or the midnight solutions weren't worth finding. It means the right person hadn't walked through the door yet and said the obvious thing out loud. Sometimes that person is a woman with silver hair and muddy boots, and a habit of stating facts without apology. Sometimes that person ends up being your father, 14 months late in a banquet hall that smelled like reheated chicken marsala. Sometimes, eventually, it's you. If any part of this story sat in your chest the way these things sometimes do, if you've ever been the person at table 11, doing real work in rooms that didn't see it, I hope you know the bridge holds. Whatever you've built, it holds. I've thought a lot about why that night shifted the way it did. Not the dramatic version of why, not the version where Margaret swooping across that banquet hall was some cosmic reward for years of quiet endurance. It wasn't that clean. Life rarely is. What I think actually happened is simpler and more uncomfortable. My father had built his understanding of value around what he could see and touch and point to. A handshake at a Little League game. A son who stayed local and took over the business. Things that fit inside the frame he'd always used. I didn't fit that frame. Not because I wasn't worth seeing, but because he'd never been asked to look differently. And nobody, not me, not my mother, not Daniel, had ever made him. Margaret made him. Not on purpose, not as a lesson, just by walking into a room and stating facts. That's the thing about people who have spent decades doing serious work in the world. They don't perform importance, they just carry it. And when she crossed that room to find me at table 11, she wasn't doing something dramatic. She was just doing what she always did. Moving toward what mattered. The cause and effect of that night took months to really settle. My father didn't transform in an instant. He's not that kind of man, and I wouldn't have trusted it if he had. What changed was smaller and more durable, he started asking. Not perfectly, not always the right questions, but real ones, and I started answering instead of bracing for the silence I'd learned to expect. That small shift, question-answer question, turned out to be the thing that actually rebuilt something between us. Not the speech, not the moment. The Tuesday dinners afterward, the pot roast silences, the awkward February where we ran out of words and sat there anyway. What I understand now is that intelligence without the courage to stay in a room that doesn't see you is just talent waiting to be wasted. I could have skipped that dinner. Part of me wanted to. But I showed up, I sat at table 11, and I held my ground quietly. Not because I knew something good was coming, but because I decided a long time ago that I wasn't going to disappear just because my family didn't know how to look for me. That's the part I'm most proud of, honestly. Not the bridge, not the federal panel, not any of it, just the fact that I kept showing up. And here's the thing about integrity. The real kind, not the performed kind. It's cumulative. Every year I did good work and didn't quit. Every time I ran the calculation again at midnight to make sure I was right. Every time I didn't soften what I knew to make someone else comfortable. All of that accrued. Margaret saw it because it was real and visible to anyone who knew where to look. My father just needed someone to point him toward the right coordinates. The bridge over Route 30 is still there. I drove over it last spring on the way to my parents' house for Easter. I didn't say anything about it. I didn't need to. My father asked, over dinner, how the federal project was going. He asked a follow-up question. He got the name of the initiative wrong, and I corrected him, and he wrote it down on the back of an envelope. I watched him write my work down on the back of an envelope, and I thought, there it is. There's the thing I was waiting for. It wasn't a grand gesture. It was a man writing something down so he wouldn't forget it. Sometimes that's what recognition looks like. And sometimes that's enough.